I just realized the other day that I haven't had a female on my channel at all. I have not interviewed a female on the Ellie in Space channel, and I would like some more women representation. So I reached out to an aerospace engineer. Her name is Lauren Savage. She's also a space systems grad student, and she has major aspirations to become an astronaut. So I interviewed her about what her path was like into her career and why she was interested in these subjects in the first place. Of course, we want to help inspire more young girls to be interested in STEM and space as much as we can. So here is our conversation. Nice to meet you.
It's nice meeting you. Thank you for hosting this.
Yeah, it dawned on me, I was like, I haven't had any female guests on my channel, which, I don't like that.
Yeah.
So, is your real last name Savage?
It is, yes.
Okay, that's a cool name.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very unique, but
That's like automatically like a badass name. Like my real last name is Sheriff, like, I shot the sheriff. So kind of unique as well. It says on your Instagram, you're an aerospace engineer by day and space systems grad student by night. So tell me about kind of like what you do for a living.
as an aerospace engineer, I have worked in several different areas. I actually started at American Airlines when I was 19 as a co-op, when I was in college still, but I worked on, I think it was 11 different aircraft fleets, everything from 777, 787, 737. If you've ever flown on American Airlines, I worked on that aircraft. After that, I went to Lockheed Martin to work in F-35 systems and software engineering. So it was doing mostly like model-based systems engineering and requirements. So it was more on the software side than the aerospace side. And then after I graduated, I got a job at Lockheed's Advanced Development Programs, which is also known as the Skunk Works, which is the very historical legacy of engineers that design and develop all kinds of future programs for aerospace. So I was working there for the last almost 2 years now. And I also do some work with like the Dream Chaser team for Sierra Nevada. Lockheed is doing a lot of the manufacturing for them. So I've been able to dabble in like composites design for some of their technology development, and then also some work on F-16s, F-35s, and F-22s.
Wow, that's quite the list.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about, so you are a grad student as well right now?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
So when do you, I guess, graduate from that?
I won't be finished until the end of 2023 because I'm a part-time grad student. So I'm only taking one course per semester, simply because I work full-time and I only have like my evenings and weekends to do lectures and homework. So it'll be about a 3-year program by the time I'm finished.
Wow, that's a lot of work on top
Yeah.
of your day job.
Yeah, it is. I joke that sometimes, I'm on my laptop for like 18 hours a day. And I put one laptop away, I pull the other one out, and it's like math and Excel and everything constantly. But it's been a really great way to learn from the aeronautical side of the industry and then also the space side of the industry, because my grad degree is in space engineering. And so now it's all kinds of like satellite design and, human vehicle considerations for space travel and that kind of thing.
I was going to say, I'm sure you're following along with everything happening with SpaceX and Blue Origin, and obviously you're involved in Sierra Space. So what are you excited about?
I am very excited first and foremost for the Artemis missions coming up. And that may be kind of a cliche answer, but I think it's going to be really amazing once we can finally put people back on the moon. And to keep them there to stay. And as we build habitats and extend life further into the solar system, I'm particularly excited about Gateway also, which is the lunar platform, which we can think of as like the space station for the moon eventually, as kind of a forward operating base for lunar travel, for Martian travel, and as we push further out into the solar system.
It's so exciting.
Yeah.
Are you involved at all with the Orbital Reef project?
No, I'm not. So since I work at Lockheed, I only work on some of the things that we contract with Sierra Space on. Um, but I have been following Orbital Reef very closely, and I'm also very excited for that project.
I was going to say, I mean, there's a lot of, competitors for, replacing the ISS. So is Orbital Reef, your favorite proposal?
So far, what I've seen from Orbital Reef, I think it's the coolest design. And I love looking at some of their conceptual drawings on how they will not only create space for research and for science, but also for tourism and for commercial space, but then also the way that they're integrating the living situation in space, because there's a very interesting intersection when you start putting humans in space or in any kind of closed area for a long time where they don't get natural sunlight, they don't get to see, green plants and the earth, that kind of thing. It goes beyond just your mental health and your state of mind, but it goes into like your circadian rhythm and then your immune system, and all of that is affected. And I love looking at some of the plans for integrating like specific light cycles and all kinds of greenery to make space habitats more accommodating for humans.
Yeah, I feel like there's so much involved that a lot of people, don't even consider, especially like I've had some conversations about when we do get to Mars and things that, like what will, human pregnancy be like, in the gestation period on Mars? How will that work? Like just totally random things that I think a lot of people might not consider initially.
Yes, there's a lot of that. And there's actually a really great book that I would recommend if anybody is wanting to look more into that. It's called Packing for Mars by Mary Roach. And it's a read that anybody can read. You don't need a technical background to read through it. But it talks all about the different human issues that you run into when you put humans in microgravity, when you take them out of, the normal Earth setting.
Right.
It really opened my mind to some of the problems that I never realized that occur when you have to design vehicles and habitats for people.
Right. Wait, what are some of those problems that, surprise you?
One of them particularly, and the reason I didn't understand why astronauts were having to do so much running on the space station on treadmills, apparently in the gravitational environment of Earth and just in the normal walking motion that we have every day, there's that impact for your bones when we walk on the ground. And that impact actually helps your bones stay strong. It helps keep them as, an important structural part of our bodies. But when you take that element out and you're no longer having regular impact, you're floating through space, or maybe it's a reduced impact in a reduced gravity situation, it can actually severely weaken your bones. So that's just one facet to so many different effects.
Do you want to go to space?
Yes.
Like how bad?
Like since I was a little kid, I used to stand in the driveway and look up at the stars and look up at the moon. And that's what, those early memories are what propelled me to want to do this. Ever since I've been a kid, I've wanted to go to space. I've wanted to fly. I have wanted to be in this industry. So I am definitely applying for the next astronaut applications. And I don't know, fingers crossed, but I would just be so happy if I could go to space.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a nice segue into what was going to be my next question is, a lot of girls and young women maybe aren't interested in STEM. And I think it's important to inspire, the younger generation. So how did you get interested in it when, again, it's not as common as I think it should be maybe for women?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think there were a lot of factors to it. So I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, near an Air Force base. So there were always fighter jets flying over, and sometimes like they would wake us up at night and my windows would be rattling. And I would see them and think, wow, that's so cool. And I also lived across the street from engineers and test pilots who had been retired. And so I would, go to pool parties and barbecues, hearing their stories about pushing the envelope out in the desert and, all the crazy stuff that they did as a test pilots. And, I also had a lot of toys that were airplanes when I was a kid, and all kinds of my parents would buy like these like space learning toys where, you can learn about galaxies and planets. And I always just loved it. I was such a curious kid. And I always wanted to grow up and fly airplanes and I wanted to become a test pilot. That was my original plan, but I ended up getting sick and had some medical disqualifications. But there are so many other paths to becoming an astronaut that you don't need to be a test pilot anymore to do that.
Are your parents involved in the space industry at all?
No, I'm the only engineer in my family and only one in aerospace.
Wow. I'm just curious, like, have you always naturally been good at, math and science? Or those pretty, do those come to you naturally or?
No, no, not at all. So I always really struggled with math. And it was one of those things where I knew I needed to understand it in order to do what I wanted to do. So I worked very hard in it, but it never came to me naturally. And I remember like a lot throughout my childhood and even into high school when I was taking like more advanced classes, I would study so much, but I would still underperform compared to my peers. And, all through college, I made C's in all of my calculus classes. So I was definitely never a strong math student, but I was always very curious and I was always willing to keep learning. And I think there's a math phobia that is kind of a problem in our education system. Yeah, and I suffer from it too. Like if I see something that requires a lot of math, I'm like, oh no. But I think a lot of it comes down to the way that people see math as such like a black and white situation of either you're good at it or you're not good at it. And it can be such a frustrating and humiliating experience for kids trying to learn and do well in math. And so that's why I make a lot of videos on my Instagram, and I do have like a small YouTube channel where I try to explain things and break them down to a very understandable level and make rocket science less intimidating, because if I can become a rocket scientist, anybody can. Like it's not something that you have to be a genius to do. It's not something that you have to have a 4.0 GPA to do. It's just something that requires curiosity and hard work and resilience. If you fail, you just have to keep doing it and do it until you know it well enough to pass.
It's still incredible though, what you've been able. I mean, not a lot of people can do that or even have the dedication to follow through when it does get hard and confusing and maybe boring at times.
Definitely.
What is people's reaction? I mean, there's that phrase, it's not rocket science, but for you it is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think it can be intimidating for people. And I always was the person that would rise to the challenge. If it looked difficult, I wanted to do it. And I always used comments that were like, no, you're not going to be able to do it. You're going to fail. I used that to fuel me and be like, I'm going to show you, I'm not going to fail. And I failed many times, but failure is never the end of the road. It's never the end of the story. It's an opportunity to try again and to learn it better the next time. I had to retake several classes in college, and I think that's completely normal for a lot of engineers. And there seems to be this pressure and misconception that you have to be perfect, but that's not true at all. And I think that if you're passionate about it, passion is definitely what drove me to be able to keep going and be resilient, because I wanted to be part of changing the future of aerospace and part of pushing people further into the solar system, and I wanted to be the one to design that. So I knew that I had to do it. I had to be dedicated.
Oh, I bet. I can't. I know a lot of engineers, actually, they're pretty much all men, except for my mom is an engineer. So, that's the outlier there. But I mean, it sounds, I've looked at some of those books and it's hard. It seems it is intimidating. And I think people probably just think that they're incapable of it. And so what's the point in trying? So hopefully more people, I mean, that's one of the, things with SpaceX is that Elon says like the heroes are the engineers, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of challenges and we are problem solvers, right? But I think that, it's not, people look at engineering and they think it's like, oh, you have to be nerdy, you have to fit in a box, you have to be, an introvert or whatever the stereotypes are. But I think engineers are some of like the most creative people I've ever met, because the problems that we solve are so multifaceted and so complex. And of course, we have to understand the math and the physics and the mechanics behind it, but we have to have big picture solutions as well. And so, I play several musical instruments. I love art. I know many other engineers who are the same, who are musicians and who are painters or creators. So I think, there's that misconception as well that might make engineering look less glamorous, and maybe think that, oh no, especially as far as little girls go, because, there aren't as many women to look up in the industry and say like, oh, I want to be her. There's like a misconception that women in STEM aren't, girly or can't be fashionable or can't wear a lot of makeup, but that's completely untrue. And I am friends with a wonderful group of women who are completely breaking those stereotypes on social media and showing the world and showing girls that you can be a fashionista and you can design rockets. You don't have to choose, you don't have to fit in a box. You can be your radiant, brilliant self. And you can also choose this as a career.
Right. And like I said, my mom is an engineer, and I know that, her graduating class was, she's like one of the only women in it. So being in the industry, has that ratio kind of evened out a little bit more? Or would you say there's still, majority men?
From my experience, it's definitely been majority men. Some of the programs that I've worked, I've been the only woman in the entire room. And also one of the youngest people in the entire room. But as far as some of the people I've worked with in the commercial side, there have been some groups that had more women. But typically, there's not a whole lot of us.
I've been asked this question a couple different ways. And it's like, why is it that young girls aren't as interested in STEM? Is it that they're not exposed to it? Is it that it's not, the Barbie of the week? Like, why do you think it is? And how do you think we can maybe change that?
Yeah, I think, it could be multiple factors. From girls aren't traditionally given toys that are airplanes or rockets to play with. We're given little Barbies that are pretty and they're fun. But I think, small things like that really influence girls at a young age. But then also there's the lack of representation as well. When you see shows on TV, you watch cartoons, a lot of the time it's like the options presented are like fashion designer or writer maybe, or, some of the more nurse. Female dominant areas. Yeah, nurse, exactly. Sure. Yeah, exactly. And you never really see engineer as an option, even in like, romantic comedies that you can watch on Netflix. It's a lot of the time like the pretty girl is like a journalist or something, and there's never shows where, oh, the pretty girl is a rocket scientist, and so just having representation for girls to look up to and say like, oh, that's actually an option for me. And it's not a career that would be boring. It's not a career that is for men, it's, I can be multifaceted in that career. And I think, it's really important to expose girls to that at a young age.
So we need to make a show like that and cast you as the main role.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, right. Yes. So, and then tell me a little bit, have you already applied to be an astronaut, or is this something that you're aiming for? And what is that process like?
Yeah, so I haven't applied yet because I'm not eligible. So for the NASA Astronaut Corps, about every 4 years, they open their applications. And to be qualified, you have to have a STEM bachelor's degree and a master's degree at minimum. And then if you don't have the master's degree, I believe you have to have like 1,000 jet hours at least, if you're coming from like the fighter pilot route. And so the next cycle, once I finish my master's degree, I'll be actually qualified for that. But as far as the whole process goes, I know it's very competitive. Since I haven't gone through it myself, I haven't been able to really see it. But I think every single cycle, you have so many more applicants, which is great, right? Because that means that people are interested in space. And there's so many phenomenal people who are actually eligible. So that's encouraging. But there's also the commercial astronaut route, which is opening up as well. And there are opportunities within that. As far as I'm aware, the only opportunities in that route are paid opportunities. So depending on if you have the funding to go, then you could do that. But I am wanting to go through the NASA astronaut route because I want to really be in the science and engineering side and development side.
Wow. Yeah, I know it's competitive. Who is like the ideal candidate for being a NASA astronaut?
So I've had the privilege of working with a few astronauts and spending time with them, and I've asked them these questions because astronauts sit on the selection boards. And the one thing that they always tell me, besides being eligible and knowledgeable and experienced, is they want to pick somebody who that they would like to go camping with. Because if you're going to be stuck in a tin can floating around space with this person, they want it to be somebody who is, likable, who can get along with people, who's a team player, who can solve problems as they pop up, somebody who doesn't get worked up easily, those kinds of personality traits. And from even like books that I've read, when astronauts are interviewing people, they will look at their body language. And if you're tapping your knee or your foot, that could indicate that you're nervous and that you're maybe easily worked up, So those are some things that apparently they haven't eliminated people for, simply just for bouncing your knee in an interview.
Wow. Well, that's good to know ahead of time.
Yeah. So if you ever interview to be an astronaut, like tuck your feet under or something.
But still, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like, we think of it just as like, oh yeah, I'd like to go to space someday, or at least like for the layman like me. And then it's like, oh my gosh, like really imagine like, being stuck in, like you said, like a tin can and just being so confined. And I feel like it'd be kind of terrifying, honestly, and maybe a little bit like overwhelming or claustrophobic even.
Definitely. Yeah. Claustrophobic for sure. And, I've worked in environments that were kind of similar to like being in a bunker, away from natural light, cut off from communications. And it can really start messing with your mind after a short amount of time, just not knowing what the weather is like outside. It could be 2 o'clock in the morning. It could be 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You wouldn't know because there's no light. And then, you're not able to see communications from your family or your friends, or it can be really isolating. And I think that that's something that plays a huge factor into why they are so careful about the personalities that they choose to go up there, at least is at this point in time where it's still so confined, because it can be so difficult to be in an isolating environment like that.
Oh yeah, you need that emotional stability. What about the idea of going to Mars? Is that something that you want to do in your lifetime? I don't even know if that's like feasible for us, but if it were a possibility.
I used to say yes to that question until I worked in those kinds of environments where I was cut off from the world and realized that I don't know that I would ever want to be in a spacecraft for 6 months, seeing nothing but darkness out the window. Kudos to those who want to and who would love to do that. I mean, we need the pioneers in this world to do that. But frankly, I wouldn't enjoy it. And I would probably go later, once a whole infrastructure is set up and it would be more commonplace to accommodate humans in that kind of environment. But personally, I would rather just go to the moon. It's a lot closer to Earth and a closer journey, just because I understand how I feel in those environments now.
I've interviewed Harvard astronomer Jonathan McDowell. So he was saying that, there are some issues with doing research from the moon, like the regolith and, just stuff. Do you agree that there are some complications with, doing research from the moon?
I think there are definitely challenges in building those kinds of habitats or those kinds of vehicles that we would put on the moon. And, like the regolith issue, that is one big issue that you have to consider. If you look back on the Apollo astronaut missions, they had a big issue with the regolith getting into their capsules. And the regolith is the consistency that if you zoom in using a scanning electron microscope, it looks like Velcro, and it gets stuck to everything. It can get into your instruments and it can get into your lungs, and it can be it's basically carcinogenic. It would be like inhaling fiberglass. And so that's like a big challenge when we look at, putting landers back on the moon and putting habitats. What kind of airlocks are we going to have to integrate? Maybe we have to blast them with air, like in a clean room, to remove all of that, so that it doesn't contaminate them. All kinds of different factors like that. Radiation is a huge one. And that's an area that I'm very passionate about, is how, we have radiation shielding requirements for spacecraft such as satellites, but that is completely changed when you want to put people in space, because now you're not just trying to protect instruments from radiation and what they're able to handle, but now you have people who are having higher rates of cancer later. If you're exposed to too much from a solar storm or even from galactic radiation, it can cause all kinds of other damage, even if it's not fatal. And so we have to really consider those vehicle requirements and consider the habitat design requirements. And the unfortunate part is some of the best ways to shield from radiation are really, really heavy materials. And so it's really hard to launch heavy things into space. It's very expensive and it's inefficient. So that's where you can look at using like in situ resources on the moon and saying, okay, what is there that we can use for these kinds of protections? Right.
Tell us what you're working on right now that you're most excited about.
I am very excited about seeing the Dream Chaser come together. And so I like to walk around it and look at it. And I go up and touch it and I'm like, this is going to space. It's pretty amazing. But I've gotten to also do some hands-on work for it. Usually engineers don't get to do actual like maintenance work. Usually it's reserved for like mechanics and it's a unionized thing, so we're not allowed to do it. But in this case, for our department, engineers are actually allowed to. So I've sometimes running around with like a heat gun, sometimes I'm running around with an X-Acto knife and doing like detailed work on things. And it's like arts and crafts. That's what I joke about, is building spaceships is like arts and crafts. But it's really amazing to be on the manufacturing side, hands-on, in addition to understanding how it works, how it's designed, and how it's going to hold up as we put it into space.
Wow, that is exciting. I made a video about James Webb recently, and there's a lot of concern about, there's so much that has to go right. And you talk about arts and crafts and, all of these like little things that humans have to put it together so perfectly, and it has to deploy so perfectly. So have you been, I'm sure you've been following it, but what are your thoughts on that? Just like crazy feat that needs to go right.
Yeah, I mean, space missions in themselves are inherently complex, and this one is even more. I joke that I'm glad that I'm not the one that's in charge of that and in charge of the logistics. But I am very excited to see what comes of it. I'm really, really hoping that it's going to be successful, and I'm really excited to see the other things we can learn about the cosmos from it, because I don't remember how much more powerful it is than the Hubble telescope that we have, but I think that we'll be able to learn a lot more from the origins of the universe and see what else is out there.
Right. And then have you ever worked for SpaceX or no? Has that been something you wanted to do?
Possibly in the future. I would like to work in that kind of environment, specifically on some of like the habitat designs that they're doing in other deep space vehicles.
Cool. Yeah, wow. What you do is so interesting. It really almost makes me wish that I would have pursued a path like that when I was much younger. I think I just never thought that I was capable or anything. And at the beginning of this year, I started really making videos about space on this channel, and it's kind of taken off, right? But I really respect, all of the hard work that you've put in to become what you are today, because I know it's not easy. So
thank you.
I'm inspired by that. And I definitely want to read that book at the least, but I just think, I think it's unfortunate that there is this like assumed, this assumption that you have to be some genius, or that like you can't learn your way through really hard things. So hopefully, your educational material and your Instagram and your YouTube can inspire more people. I mean, I'm sure you've received feedback from people as your content has grown. What have you heard from people?
Yeah, so most people really love it. I get some comments from people who are saying like, there's no way I could understand this if you're not an engineer. And so of course I take that feedback and try to change the way that I'm presenting the material, because unfortunately a lot of what I do explain does rely on like calculus and some higher level concepts, but even calculus can be broken down into just concepts. We don't necessarily need to go through the derivations. And I think that seeing that kind of math intimidates people. So a lot of my videos recently have avoided even showing the math, because I'm like, okay, we can explain it using concepts that you're already familiar with, because it's the way that education has been presented for so long, I think, has focused on some of those traditional methods, but I am really looking to kind of shatter that and really show people that rocket science doesn't need to be this thing that is intimidating. It's something that you need to be curious about and open to learning and passionate about it. But for the most part, people are really loving it. And actually a few of my videos have kind of taken off on YouTube as far as like helping kids study for their exams. And that always makes me nervous because I don't want to, explain something incorrectly or write a formula incorrectly, and then kids are using it for their exams. But yeah, so far the feedback has been really, really good.
Yeah, and you're not only inspiring just, men and women in general to be more curious and maybe try something that they otherwise might not have, but do you have a passion in inspiring women? I mean, is that something that's important to you just because, bottom line is there's not a lot of women that are doing this?
Yeah, that is something that I'm passionate about. And I do quite a bit of volunteering from the industry side. My company partners with several different organizations in my area, and they always need engineers to sign up and go do like career days or like STEM camps for kids, and just being that visibility in the classroom at a young age as an engineer. So I do quite a few of those events, but also as far as getting girls involved in it, I really hope that my Instagram is able to do that as well. And just to show them that they can be multifaceted. You don't need to be fitting in a box as an engineer. You can like fashion, you can like space, you can like airplanes, you can like all of it.
Right. And just one more question. Who is your role model?
Oh man, I have so many. But one of my, I think the most influential one that I've had in my life, he was a mentor to me back when I was like middle school, high school. He was actually an SR-71 pilot and a U-2 pilot and a test pilot. And he would send me every day information on like experimental aircraft and different things that I needed to learn and had never heard of, because a lot of experimental aircraft programs from back in the 60s were canceled. So a lot of people just never hear about these things. And so, he was able to provide me with so much knowledge and so many materials that just kept feeding the fire. And then he actually bequeathed his Air Force wings to me before he passed away because he wanted me to continue on his legacy, which I was later medically disqualified for. But that's always something that I keep in mind that, maybe I will go back and try again to fly more for the military, just to continue that legacy on. But yeah, I think he's been the greatest role model I've had, but just because his story was so inspiring to me also. And then I kind of brought it full circle and went to go work for the Skunk Works, which was a lot of like the experimental stuff that he was testing back in, 50s and 60s and 70s. So.
And what's his name, just so we can honor him?
Oh, his name was General Keller.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And I don't know if this is a dumb question, but educate me. You said that he bequeathed his wings to you. What does that mean?
So Air Force pilot wear wings on their lapel.
Okay.
And so every time you graduate flight school in the military, they give you a pair of wings. And so those were his wings that they were going to pin on me.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. Wow. That's nice.
Yeah, so he was very influential, at least in guiding my path towards aerospace and towards a career in pushing and designing to the edge of the envelope.
Oh yeah, I bet he'd be thrilled with what you're doing today.
Thank you.
Again, I just really want to thank you because I think it's fascinating, and I really do want to get more. I've tried to reach out to Gwen Shotwell a couple times, and her assistant said that she's interested but busy, which I guess she's a little busy, you know, I guess I buy that.
Again, a big thanks to Lauren Savage for coming on the Ellie in Space channel. It was really a pleasure to talk to her, and I really hope that she does get to become an astronaut someday. How cool would that be? I'm going to link her social media accounts in the description if you want to go follow her. She is definitely someone worth following in this niche of space. And thank you so much if you are new to the channel for checking out this video. Please make sure to give it a like and subscribe to Ellie in Space if you haven't already.